get out of this real quickly. Okay. Well, shall we get started? It looks like we've got a nice number of people on here. And I'll bring this up. And we will do slideshow.
All right. So the agenda is before you. We will try to stick that time. If somebody could be a timekeeper and let us know if our discussion goes long and we need to move forward, that would be helpful. We should be able to get through it since we don't have as many people, so it should be good. Okay, you want to go ahead and go to the next slide? And that would,
Oh, it's Reverend Thompson. We need Reverend Thompson to open us up.
yeah.
Are you ready?
Yep.
Okay. Let us pray. Eternal God of justice and truth, we pray for the day when injustice will be eradicated across our land. May systemic racism be exposed by the truthful teaching that all people are created in the image and likeness of God, the one who equally values all humanity. Help us to base our work of justice on truth and integrity. This we pray in the name of the most holy and just God. Amen.
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 With the current events, I just want to share briefly with respect to three things that are facing across our land, across this country, even in Nashville. The critical race theory debate, the voter suppression issues, and then as of today, Juneteenth. And all of these three issues are rooted in the past, and all are based on racism. And I was reminded of the prophet Jeremiah. And I want to think about the purpose of what we're doing today, and I want to kind of compare it to, I'll call the critical religious truth with the critical race theory. Jeremiah was a prophet of the Old Testament during the time of the 7th and 6th century BC. And the people that he was delivering God's message to didn't want to hear the truth. They didn't want to hear about their past. And the people to whom Jeremiah was speaking to had taken on the very nature of the people who had previously possessed the promised land. And Jeremiah, like other prophets, told the critical truth about the people's past. And they didn't want to hear their past, or they didn't want to hear the outcome of their future. And Jeremiah told them in the face of the Babylonians about to attack Judah, he told them that they were damned. And many of you might remember another prophet, the 20th century, that also told the critical truth about America. He also said something similar to what the Old Testament prophet Jeremiah said about Judah, but he said it about America. And in one of his sermons, he said, "Damn America." Many of you might know I'm talking about Jeremiah Wright. And you almost know this almost ended the run of Barack Obama because many people are saying he was connected to Jeremiah Wright, which he was. He belonged to his church. And America passed. And when we think about the critical race theory, we're really thinking about America's past of racism and violence. And I think now that it's critical for us to really speak about racism, anti-racism, and see how we as a justice group, and we also claim to be anti-racist, and what we can do to make the memos of Noah be aware about racism and all forms of racism and how it can affect even a progressive, maybe liberal social justice group. So I hope that what we will be doing for today and eventually with all of NOAA, and I hope we can even take this across the other Gamaliel affiliates of Tennessee, that we speak critically about race and what it means for America. So this is basically what I just want to say, and I hope that what we've accomplished today, the purpose of it is that make us more informed and to see where do we go from here, and really who needs to hear this. And that's where I hope that we will learn something today, what we can do for all of NOAA, and how we can join with others across our country to deal with this issue of race and racism. So that's basically all I have to say today, and some other things I hope we can discuss as we go through the presentation today.
Thank you, Reverend Thompson. So to pick up on what Reverend Thompson said, NOAA has stated that we want to become an anti-racist organization. In order to accomplish NOAA's goal of becoming a fully anti-racist organization, we have to understand what we mean by anti-racism. When you hear those terms related to anti-racism, what are we talking about? In order for us to become an organization, we have to be in agreement on what those anti-racist terms mean between ourselves. We'll begin our journey tonight by utilizing a document called Common Language to Foster Common Understanding as a tool to assist in the accomplishment of getting eventually to our goal of becoming a fully anti-racist organization. The Education Task Force worked with Reverend Thompson. After having an initial discussion with him, we came up with some steps that we've agreed upon that'll help us get to that goal of becoming a fully anti-racist organization. Now, step one, which is where we are tonight, the executive committee and community organizers will participate in this guided discussion of NOAA foundational common language definitions with an opportunity for you all to add some additional anti-racist definitions if you see fit. Two, there'll be a work session with task forces and working groups around NOAA's foundational vocabulary that we come up with tonight, with an opportunity then for those task forces to add definitions related to the specific work of their task force. Three, we'll train the facilitators to lead future working sessions. Think, if you will, the concept of train the trainer. Four, eventually, we'll train our member organizations. The most important concept here is this is not a sprint, you guys. This is a marathon. But in order to finish, we got to start, and we got to start someplace. The logical place for us to start in NOAA is here with you all, the leadership, the executive committee, and community organizers. Again, thank you all for attending this evening. What we're going to do this evening is walk through, we're going to review the agreements, which I'm going to do real shortly. We'll then, Lorraine will take us through those foundational anti-racist terms and definitions, help us understand what the impact of those definitions and terms are to our work. We'll talk about next steps. We'll do an evaluation. Reverend Thompson will close us out and pray, and that'll be it. We'll be gone from this work session to move to the next step. But before we can get started tonight, I am going to review the agreements tonight so that we can all be on the same page. The first one, listen to understand, everyone. These definitions will mean something different to each and every one of us when we hear them. Listen for a true understanding of what a particular definition means to you. And then don't just hear it, adhere to it, internalize it. These are not just the first agreement, but all of these agreements in order to get us to the best place that we can be at the end of this work session today. Assume best intentions. I just want to say we're all trying to get to that goal that we talked about, becoming a fully anti-racist organization. Assume that everyone, whatever goes on tonight, whatever is said, whatever is discussed, whatever is shared, assume that your teammates are also positively trying to move to the same place. Assume that everyone is positive in trying to move to that place. Reflect on your reactions to increase your own self-awareness. All of us are where we are based upon where we came from and our life experiences. Hear yourself and how you're reacting to each of these definitions. Work with them, stay with them to positively, hopefully, increase your own self-awareness. The next one is speak your own truth. It's your truth. Speak up, share your truth. Nobody can speak your truth as well as you can. Next, importantly, be present and actively participate. Stay with us. We're only here a very short period of time, you all. We need everyone to stay in the moment, stay off your phone, stay off your email, stay off scheduling those meetings that everybody needs to get done. Stay with us and strive to actively participate as we go through this work session this evening. Participate, but don't dominate. Step up, step back. We need you to participate, speak your truth, but if you find yourself taking over participating, step back so your team member can then share their truth about whatever the particular subject is we're discussing. Expect non-closure and expect some discomfort. Every issue we talk about tonight will not be tied up, wrapped up with a nice, neat little bow. There'll be some non-closure, but that is the journey that we're beginning tonight. Remember I said, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. Expect some discomfort, you all, because it's an uncomfortable subject that we're discussing with each other this evening. Finally, disagree with ideas, not people. Again, we're all on this journey together. We're getting to the same goal, which is to hopefully get NOAA to the place where we are a fully anti-racist organization. Someone will say something that you would disagree with tonight. Talk about the idea. Don't attack your teammate. We're all in this together. And with that said, I'll turn it over to Lorraine.
Thank you. So what I did first, folks, is just put some anti-racist definitions on the screen for you to just kind of look at. This is not an exhaustive group of definitions, but some that have been talked about a lot in the literature, and besides the Wikipedia one. And so this kind of grounds us in terms of what we're thinking about and what we want, hopefully, for NOAA to become. And as you look at these, I was wondering if anybody would be willing to just kind of step up and say which one really speaks to you in terms of how it could be used with or used with NOAA. I have my own favorite in this, but you know, just read through them and let me know which one. You can either put it in the chat or come off mic and talk about why.
Well, I think the one anti-racism is the active dismantling of systems, privileges, and everyday practices that reinforce and normalize the contemporary dimensions of white dominance. And I think that's the type of organization that we are. We are trying to dismantle racist system, the built-in racism, like in healthcare and everything else, in education. And I think that's where NOAA fits in.
Thank you for that. We are right here with each other. That's my favorite one as well. Anybody else?
I like that same one. I liked it because it talks about systems, you know, systems and practices and privileges.
Yeah.
It would be more concrete.
Yeah. I think it's important to talk about systems because that's really what, if we go down to the one by Ibrahim Kendi, that it's about power and policy, not people. I don't know if it's not about people, right? Because once you have those systems, who is in charge of those systems but people? And so I think the other one by Ms. Crenshaw really gets at it is about system and it is about privilege, but it's also about everyday practices of people where these things are kind of normalized and become a habit, in other words, you know, that this is just the way it is. And if we are going to become an organization that is anti-racist, then we have to dismantle and interrupt the way it is, right? And I know that through the Education Task Force, that's what we're trying to do is interrupt the way it is. And so that really speaks to me. Anybody else have anything else they want to share about
Well,
it?
I had the same question, Lorraine, with
Yeah.
respect to that one, not people. I was trying to understand it. I didn't want to take it out of context. It's just a little snippet. I would like to see the whole paragraph to see what the author was saying, but I just couldn't accept that.
Yeah,
Not people. I didn't understand it. I don't know what else he said to explain it, but just reading that short part of a sentence, I couldn't accept that part.
yeah, me either. And it was listed as the beginning of almost like a chapter, you know, and that's what the chapter was named. So I said, okay, so that means that he kind of thinks that it's not people, that if we deal with the systems, but systems are run by people. So that's where I struggle with it. Anyway, we'll move on because we want to stick to our time. Next slide. Okay, where's the heading? Okay, so I don't know how many of you looked at the definitions, but if you did, is there an immediate reaction to it, to the definitions? What did you think? What did it make you think about? Because really and truly, as Linda kind of pointed out in the beginning, when you look at these definitions, you're going to react to them based on your lived experiences. You know, not mine, not Reverend Thompson, not anybody else's, but your lived experiences and the things that impact you. I was having a conversation with a young lady, a student who moved into the school that I work at, and she lived in a rural county. And she said this was the first time she was ever going to be around this many Black people. And all of her knowledge about the Black experience, quote unquote, was from the news and what people in her community said to her, right? And so her place on understanding those different definitions may be terribly different than yours or mine, right? We at NOAA kind of feel like we have an understanding of anti-racism and injustice, and we're working for equity and all of those things. But when we really get down to those definitions, we still are impacted by our lived experiences. And so I want to put to the group, what is an individual's responsibility? Once you accept these definitions, what's your individual responsibility? What is each NOAA person's responsibility in terms of exercising an anti-racist environment? What is every individual in NOAA? What is the hope of NOAA for every individual in NOAA to live an anti-racist life? What does that mean?
This is Reverend Sinkfield. Once the definitions are accepted and embraced, I suspect the first step for all of us would be a level of introspection to determine to what degree we have participated in, supported, endorsed, or been a propagator of some form of racism, so that we can do the necessary personal transformative work in order to work together as a group in such a way that we can, as a group, advocate for that type of transformative work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Absolutely. Because it is a personal journey. And before we can work as an organization, we have to personally address where we are on this spectrum, right? And how are we going to address our own biases? We all have biases. and we are impacted by those things that I talked about before, our lived experiences. And so you are exactly right that we have to do a personal journey in terms of coming to terms with those definitions. Some may be very easy for you to accept, others may be more difficult. And leading into that, were there any definitions that were easier for you to process or more difficult? Either one.
Let me ask you, Lauren, now which definition, are you speaking about one on the common language?
The common language definitions, yes.
I was, sorry,
Go ahead.
I was going to
Liza.
speak up right quick because I'm kind of sitting in this spot where it's not exactly the definitions, but it's the definitions and a whole lot more, where I am getting to a place where I just see white privilege in everything I look at. And so it's, I haven't yet figured out how to address that, how often to address that. But it's daunting in that now I see it, every day, everywhere.
Yeah. And so what comes to mind when you say that, Liza, is that once we have an understanding, once we've come to grips with the definitions and we see the world for what it is, right? What do we do with that when we see it now? Right? How do we take it in? How do we address it? What, do we speak out every time we see it? What do we do with it? And I think one of the things that we can think about as an organization is challenging that feeling of helplessness almost when you're running into those things into our work. And how do we change that and put it into the work? Because you can't, every time you see it, you can't address it, right?
Right.
It'd be a never ending kind of battle for you, and so I think, and that's a real thing, that once you become, for lack of a better phrase, and this is the phrase that's out there, woke in a sense, and you begin to see it everywhere in every institution, it becomes exhausting almost, and so we have to find ways to address it, to deal with it, and to feel like we are making a headway in our lives about it instead of just letting it sit there, right?
But also like a way that is effective.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why I kind of channel it back to Noah, that here's an organization that is saying it is committed to anti-racism. So how can we take what we see and build upon it? I think when we talk about starting with this group and building a groundswell within Noah for understanding, I think that makes us more powerful, right? In terms of addressing the things that we see. And so that's why the definitions are so important. That's why that personal journey is so important. That's why we're beginning this work now. Anybody else on ones that were easier for you to process or more difficult for you to process? So again, the rest of this, I think, is just what we've talked about before, being uncomfortable, unclear. That means you need to do more personal work with it. And what does personal work mean? Personal work means reading. Personal work means interact. Personal work means talking to others about it who you feel might be understanding of where you're at, and maybe they can give you some idea of where to go. Are there any definitions, when you looked at the list, are there any definitions that are missing, need to be added at this point?
One thing, when we started this talk and I started searching, I guess I have looked up, I know 20 plus articles, really more than that, and numerous definitions. I know I have taken a list of 100 plus definitions.
Mm,
That's a whole lot. I think this is a good summary, but I think personally, I think it's missing a lot.
mhm.
And then I know we had talked earlier about of our 4 task forces and even our IVE group. Each one might want to get the specific terms that more with that particular task force or IVE working group. But I think we can come up with a lot of more key definitions at this time, and especially with some of the current events.
Sure.
Like for just one, critical race theory. I think that's something now that people really have to understand what it is, because so many states now are passing the anti-critical race theory training. So it's a whole lot of other terms we can use, but I think down the road we can continue to add them.
Sure. Well, if there's anything that anybody feels like is really, really missing from a basic, because that's what these definitions were, just the basis of what we needed to have to begin to have our discussions around and agreement upon just some basic ideas that we definitely need to embrace. But if there are others, please put them in the chat. All right, we can move on. Now it comes up. So the impact on the work of NOAA. This area is really, really important, because once you understand what anti-racism is and what it includes and how far reaching it is, then you have to think about how it impacts your work, the work that you're doing. And since we have 2 community organizers on the call, I think it's important for you guys to weigh in too, because you really work in those areas of pushing the work out through those task force. So my question is just what's on there. How would embracing these definitions and terms impact our work? What's the value of even doing this in terms of our work?
Well, one thing for me is I'd like to make sure that when we're talking about the issues, like whether it's affordable housing or education or whatever, that we are calling out the racial impact. In terms of affordable housing, sometimes we have not done that, and I think we ought to. It's good to say we need 31,000 affordable rental units, but what is the impact of that racially? And so I think it would be helpful to us to start doing more of that.
One of the things, that's a great point. One of the things that we will get to toward the end is Annie Casey Foundation has come out with a list of 7 things that organizations need to do to ensure that they are equitable. And one of them is that every policy that you come up with or every initiative that you're involved in, you should really take a step back and think about it in terms of equity, anti-racism, and look at it from that perspective, so that you know that you're not doing something to people instead of for people, right? You're doing things with people instead of for them, that kind of thing. And so we'll see that as we go along. Anybody else? How would embracing these definitions and terms impact our work? Anybody else? We can go on then. Go ahead.
I think Lorraine, like the question of like reflection, where Reverend Singfield brought that up, sort of this personal reflection piece. In some of our meetings, we'll start a meeting with an individual giving a reflection to say this is an aspect of organizing or leadership or systems that affects me or that I've dealt with, and here's what I learned from it. What did you learn from it? So I feel like we could integrate, I think, more of that kind of reflection, and maybe from a point of anti-racism into our meetings, and really get folks to stimulate these things, for them to do this reflection too.
Sure. I think it's going to have to be a part, if we really are serious about this work, in everything we do. You can go on to the next. What is our readiness as a group to adopt these terms? What needs to happen to do this in a meaningful way? So are we ready as an organization? If we're not ready yet, what do we need to do to make sure that we're ready to do this kind of anti-racism work. It's more than just talking about, okay, we have a plan, but what is going to make us ready?
Lorraine, I have one point. I don't know if we're gonna really get to it today, but how we look at anti-racism policies, how do we look at it from the white perspective? How do they view it? And how do Blacks view it? Because it might be different. And I think that's one thing we have to deal with first if we're gonna work. Because we are
Multiracial.
biracial, so not biracial, but we have to,
Multiracial.
pardon me,
Multi.
multiracial. But that's where we have to look at it. How do I look at it? When I look at this, how have I been affected by it? From a Black person, I constantly think how I've been affected by racism from birth. And then how do whites look at it? How have they been a cause of it? Whether or not from their ancestors or who. And we have to deal with that issue because we look at it differently.
That's right. I think that Reverend Thompson is at the gut of really where this organization is going to have to live for a little while to become an anti-racist organization, because we are a multi-racial organization, and we again come from many, many, many different lived experiences with regard to race, racism, and all of that. And so having conversation is probably the number one way that we can open our hearts to where people are coming from, and have those kinds of discussions, because we can't move, at least where I sit, we can't move as an organization without that level of understanding, and empathy for one another.
This is Reverend Sinkfield again. I just to push on that a little and just say this briefly. I agree with Reverend Thompson, and the fact of the matter is, this would also go to nomenclature. This would also go to how we name things. For instance, how would a person who's been a victim of racism or been the downside of racism define the word affordable? For instance, in our task force called affordable housing, how would that be defined? How is in our task force called criminal justice? First of all, how would one race see criminal versus another race see criminal, and how would that justice be worked out? So when you start talking about nomenclature, you got to, it pushes us to look at every single aspect of what we do to make sure we're doing it with equitability and fairness.
I'm hearing what you guys are saying, and it seems really important. And it seems to me that we're going to have to work on putting some expectations or some structures in place, because this is, I remember when we were going to look at the racial tension in each meeting, and then we kind of forget most of the time to actually do that. And so, like, if we really want to really do these things, there's going to have to be an expectation, that they get accomplished.
And it has to be intentional. That's the thing. Instead, we just can't expect that it's going to happen, because I know sometimes you sit in these meetings, we're going through the whole planning process, and we sometimes forget to go back intentionally for the entire group to go over what NOAA's goals and objectives are now, and then what the task force goals and objectives are, which should roll up to this whole anti-racist concept. But sometimes we're just not intentional enough to stop and do that and bring everyone along.
One way we might try to integrate anti-racism into all of our meetings and all of our leadership would be to delegate or designate someone to be responsible for observing when racist ideas surface, unaware or intentionally. to have an anti-racist czar or committee chair to participate in meetings and bring those offenses to the fore so they can be dealt with.
I, I think that
Interesting.
if we become an anti-racist organization, we have to police ourselves, everybody.
Intentionality.
And yes, that does speak to intentionality. I think it's important that when we see it, when we feel it, when we hear it, that we speak it, that we speak about it to each other, and that we create an environment in which everyone feels comfortable enough to bring that to the forefront, right? I think a lot of times people will feel a certain way, even if it's not racist, quote unquote. It's just, I have a feel, I don't understand, or I have a bad feeling, or I'm not sure what you're saying to me. A lot of times people will have those feelings, but don't feel that the environment will include them or will allow them to speak their truth. And I think that's going to be an important part of creating an organization in which people feel and trust in one another, that how I'm feeling I can bring to the forefront and speak about it and have people receive it and have an open dialogue, kind of like, you know, the agreements that Linda went through in the beginning. Just we be open to those things. It's a process. What the literature tells us is that becoming an anti-racist organization or an equity organization can take 5 to 7 years, you know,
Ooh.
and that's with intentionality. And so it is work that has to be done, you know, continually, because it's not like you check this box off that I've been through the anti-racist training, I'm good. Right? Because we have lived with this for so long that we have to continue to address it in our lives. And so, you know, this next point about, you know, how do we deal with it in trainings and PD? Does it have to become a part of every part of who we are, as a system-wide intentional thing that we do? You know, making sure that everything that we do, whether it's in any of these areas, that we are doing it through an equity lens.
What is PD?
Professional development. I'm sorry.
Right.
Let me ask, before you get to the next point, Lorraine, both Reverend Sinkfield and Mike spoke about it. I'm just gonna give an example of one of our task force, the Affordable Housing Task Force. Three terms that came out, and it could have been racial or not. We want to call it affordable housing, then we talked about workforce housing, then we talked about low-income housing. And which one do you think referred to Black people or people of color? Of those three terms, which one do you think?
Low income.
Low income. And you could kind of sense that. People were saying even that we can't use low income. But then, and from one perspective, they didn't see how that was being racist. They thought that it was best to say affordable or workforce housing instead of saying low income, because that's associated with Black people.
Yeah, that's what it's associated with.
And that was an instance that why not do, you know, it was given a nomenclature, a title, and I think it was a racist means. I don't know if they realized it or not. And Mike, you might can address that too. You may remember that you were in part of those meetings.
Sure, I was in some of them, and it's a complex thing, because I agree with you. I think it is, particularly when you're talking about trying to locate affordable housing into areas, there is a heck of a lot of racism going on in terms of the not in my backyard kind of thing. And so it is complex. And with, I think, low income housing is sometimes seen as Black. I remember there was a council member a number of years ago who probably the only thing he ever said I agreed with is that instead of saying affordable, we ought to say obtainable. You know, because there's so much that people say that is affordable that you really can't obtain.
Could afford, right?
You know?
Yeah, what's affordable to you might not be affordable to me, right?
Right. Right. And so that gets into one of the things that task force has had to deal with is, just as Reverend Thompson said, are we talking about workforce housing? That's actually a little bit insulting. That assumes that people that are in public housing or something are not working, which is not true. You know, so there are a lot of things that are attached to some of those words. I think that is something we ought to be looking at carefully.
Yeah, I mean, on the same line, I think about criminal justice. When you think about the word criminal, what comes to many people's minds, who is the criminal that we see? So yeah, it's really being sensitive to what we're putting out there, because whatever we put out there, that's what they assume we represent, right? And so go ahead, Brian, with the next point. Yeah, so in what ways does a dominantly white culture impact the organization? So we just talked about that, right? In some sense, because the culture that we live in is a predominantly white culture, right? And so how are we breaking through to help this culture be more inclusive, right? We're doing that through affordable housing. We're doing that through education, right? Trying to make it more equitable system. But it's hard work, right? Because people, again, come from different points of view with regard to, the quote unquote dominant culture. I've heard many, many times that when we talk about reparations and that kind of thing, that white people will say, hey, I didn't have slaves, right? And understanding our history and how our history impacts us today. So, we really have to think about the ways that the culture is impacting our organization. And I think when you start thinking about the individual churches and organizations and groups that are in NOAA, how are those individual churches, how are those organizations impacted by a dominant culture that keep them from looking at things with an equity lens, with an anti-racist lens? So, again, once we spread this out to a lot of people, then it becomes even more of a challenge in terms of what you're dealing with.
Going back to your thing about terms, one of the things Gamaliel is doing that I really like is they had a criminal justice initiative and they changed it to transformational justice, which I like a lot because it implies transformation. It implies that we're coming back together, kind of like restorative practice, Lorraine. It has a way of, instead of using the criminal and kind of pejorative language. So,
yeah, I mean, I think that criminal justice is something, that term we need to think about.
And that's key with a lot of our terms. In a lot of writings, people don't like to use dominant white, because the dominance signifies certain things. So even I've had problems even with that term. So the terminology can be ingrained in people's minds, in both those who are oppressed and those who are oppressing. So we have to be very careful of our terminology. That helps to end racism too, the terminology that we use.
And so one of the starting places, I think, for NOAA would be to take a look at what has been written already, right? And make sure that the language that's being used is such that supports being an anti-racist, being, looking at things through an equity lens. That's a beginning point for all of us to just kind of look at how we write and what is written and what we are putting out into the public as representing NOAA. Okay, we can go ahead. So moving to action, we may have covered some of this. Yeah, and again, this is just, again, thinking about what would be the impact of having a common anti-racist language in NOAA. The true impact of that, what would that look like for NOAA? If we could really make this happen, right, where all of NOAA was on the same page about and speaking the same language. When we said white privilege, we knew, everybody in NOAA knew what we were saying. If we said systemic racism, everybody in NOAA knew what we were talking about. What advantage, what would make, how would that help NOAA to move forward with the work that they're trying to do?
Well, we do that in churches all the time with language. I mean, it creates a sense of vision. It creates a sense of unified purpose. It creates a sense of common direction and common agenda. And clearly, if we are seeking to be a singular organization that is the result of multiple organizations coming together in unity, to have that type of common language, I think is essential to being able to get the work done we're trying to get done. I want to circle back real quick too to something Bill suggested, because you're asking for action points. And I appreciated the statement that said all of us should self-govern. But I think Bill was almost suggesting a type of, he said czar, but it's almost like when you talk in terms of having meetings and the like, you in Robert's Rules of Orders, you do have a position called Sergeant of Arms. And that Sergeant of Arms task is literally when things are stated or done out of order to bring things back into order. I'm not so sure we should not consider a both and thing. Not only should we self-govern, but potentially have someone who is equipped with the common language of NOAA and the common way of speaking and operating. And if somebody, as you stated, is ashamed or scared or doesn't feel comfortable saying it because they don't think the room is good for it, they have a person to back that play potentially, or a group to back that play, or whoever it would be.
I like that too.
And I appreciate the goal of being able to police ourselves, but until we get there, we may need to empower certain people to pay particular attention to those issues and to raise them really on behalf of folks who are afraid to raise the issues.
Yeah, I hear that. I definitely hear that. You know, and in the outline, I think that was submitted for rolling this out, there was a kind of a train the trainer kind of people who would then begin spreading this to the organ. Maybe those are the persons who could initially be those bearers of the definitions, bearers of, you know, anti-racist language, bearers of, you know, looking at things through an equity lens in our meetings and that kind of thing. Just as we're thinking this through, I think all of that, everything is on the table, guys. I mean, in terms of moving forward with action steps, you know, everybody has input, has a reason for being here, has a reason for wanting to see this work move forward. So can we agree that that having the anti-racist language, it would be beneficial for NOAA? Common language, can we all agree on that, that having that common language would be important? Yes?
Yeah.
I believe that would be important. And I was also thinking about the group that's talking about a team in each member organization. And if they are trained in what our definitions are, and that could be part of what they are doing within the organization. I believe the term was a team, and was it?
Core team, I believe.
Core team.
14.
Yeah, core team. Yes, core team. And I think if it would be their job to see that it's understood the terms in each organization.
Yeah.
I mentioned something a while ago that we said we were going to try, and frankly, we have forgotten it. And that is when we do our evaluations, the third point in the evaluation is, was there any tension in the meeting? And of course, we actually do want some tension, so people act differently afterwards than they did before. But at one point we said, let's try adding to that, was there any racial tension that we need to be aware of?
Yes.
And I don't know, people might not talk about that a lot, but at least it would definitely indicate that's something we're looking at in terms of the meetings. It seems like that would be something that we could begin with, or implement fairly easily.
I think that might be if, you know, if you make that one of your question, tension and racial tension added possibly.
And
Yes. Are we adhering to an equity lens? Are we adhering to an anti-racist conversation, you know, and get agreement on that, I think would be important. Okay, you can go into it.
That's pretty clear, Lorraine. Are we adhering to an anti-racist conversation or whatever? That's.
Yeah.
But until your organization is trained, then what does that mean? That's how we got here tonight. What does, are we adhering to an anti-racist curriculum or approach mean to them? If you got 50 people in the room, that sentence is going to mean 50 different things to them.
And
the organization is brought along.
Right.
Yeah, I think that would have to take that question come on board after we'd have this training, so people will know what these definitions are and what we are, and if we are agreeing to accept these.
That's
and
right.
Then they have to be taught to all members.
Yes. Yes, I was speaking as if we were all trained, but yes, I agree with Mike as well, that in the beginning, maybe just asking, was there any racial tension? But once we have agreed upon the common language of NOAA, then we certainly could then ask, you know, has this conversation, has this meeting been conducted with an anti-racist kinds of lens? I think that the other thing that when Passage began this whole process of having common language, it was really just for the MNPS and the education, and the Advanced Academic Task Subcommittee of Passage. But then we began to think, what if everybody in Nashville, all the organizations, were speaking the same language when we talked about all of the definitions that you have been sent, and how powerful that would be in terms of changing how this city looked at things and really understood things. And so that's where this question, what would be the impact of having a common anti-racist language in Nashville? You know, if the fire department, if the police department, if the, you know, if the chamber were all speaking the same language, how powerful would that be?
Well, one thing, Lorraine, that would be powerful, but as we know in Tennessee and across the nation, don't want to discuss anti-racism with with critical race theory. So it's going to be very difficult if we're not taught in schools the historical aspect of racism in America. How will people be able to discuss anti-racism?
Sure.
If it's not going to be discussed? So that's one of our actions that we have to help change, and we have to help fight against the climate in Tennessee as well as across the nation.
Sure. Sure.
And Lorraine, this just really has me thinking, you know, sort of what do we mean, right? We're using language, and then I think it means that we also have to put real action in behind our language. You know, so adopting the language is maybe it's that first thing that sort of gets us to that edge of, if this is who we're saying we are, then how do we behave, and, you know, how do we operate? And then I think, as Reverend Thompson's saying, like that whole policy, that's like it's like a national policy to not fund, to outlaw critical race theory. It's like, this implies that we need to be taking anti-racist action, you know what I mean? I think it also implies that we have to be willing to take that risk, you know, and we're asking leaders to take that risk. Maybe we're asking the school board people to take risks and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, it's exciting, and I think it has some deep and profound implications.
So I agree. One thing I will say though is that every organization that will adopt and have this common language, no matter who they are, there is power in numbers. And just as we're bringing this to NOAA, there are at least 3 or 4 other organizations that are working with these definitions to make them common language for them. And so, I think the first step is really having some commonality when we're discussing things among organizations that moves us to action. And that when we are these 4 or 5 organizations, when we are in a place of action, that we know that if they're dealing with systemic racism, we know what they mean and what they're working on. That's to me is the power of having the common language in a sense. It definitely, in the climate we live in, is going to be difficult. I'm not negating that at all. I'm just saying that if we can chip away, a little by little at people having a common sense of what anti-racism is and language around that, that helps to build coalitions, and that kind of thing. Moving on. What are we really committed to? How will this help our work? I think we've kind of answered that one, and maybe don't need to belabor it. I think my suggestion, and I don't know, I've heard a lot of things and people coming at this. I really think we need to think about next steps. What are, the next steps in terms of getting this, taking this to another level? We have about 5 or 6 people here this evening. I think, again, we will need from the leadership level an agreement and understanding and, of this work that is ahead of us as an organization before we can move to another level. And what does that mean? There's some things we can change immediately, like that were talked about in terms of adding to our meetings, but it really is going to take some work. It really is going to take some work. And so just thinking through, you don't have to speak if you don't want to, but what kind of changes will we need to make in NOAA as it exists right now? What kind of changes?
I don't know if this speaks to it, but one thing is we're going to have to begin the process of training a very large, very diverse organization. And the next step being the leadership of the task forces is what I see as the next step in that particular arena. So if that's what we're trying to actually move toward becoming an anti-racist organization, it's got to start from where we are today, and then it's got to roll downhill. And the downhill is the leadership of the task forces. That then would put people in place that could be that, what do we call that person or that group of people that
core
team.
Yeah,
Core team, yes.
Right. To begin to develop that core team that would be the people to, call out racist actions or decisions or direction in our meetings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Linda put in the chat, can we agree to move forward with training the task force and working group leadership? I guess is what you're just saying. So is there agreement that that's the next step?
I think that would be a next step, but I also heard Reverend Thompson say that he thought there maybe need to be some more definitions added. So maybe Reverend Thompson, could you speak to that? How much you think some definitions that you have could be added to the list?
Mm-hmm.
Before we start the training, we need to be settled on what the definitions are and which ones that we will include.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Thompson, you're on mute. I'm sorry. looks like maybe you're trying to talk.
Okay, yes, I was gonna say that, I had looked at a lot of definition. I can send it to everyone, send it to Brian. He has everything. I think I sent you something though, Brian, didn't I? Previously of some key definitions, some major studies. But also, I do want to say Gamelia is, and the consultant for NOAA is working on trying to do some training very soon. And they want to bring in people who are not associated with NOAA in a way, both a black consultant and a white consultant to come in and work with us. But I don't see anything wrong by us starting some work ourselves. But they are working on doing that. Now, hopefully, we know within the next few weeks when they would like to plan that to come about. And I with respect to that, they have been working on it. We had one, as you know, one of the last first of right before the pandemic, but we didn't go back into it after that. But now Gamelia and the consultant is working on bringing somebody in to help us with training. But what we're doing now is giving us some good ideas, and I think it won't hurt. And then we can go with the training that Gamelia wants to do.
So the last slide here really is the work of the Annie Casey. Go back, Brian.
Sorry.
Is the work of the Annie Casey Foundation in terms of those 7 steps to advance and embed race equity in your work. And I think it's a decent roadmap for thinking about and getting at those root causes of race equity and race inequity rather, and embedding it too. So the first one is establish an understanding of race equity and inclusion principles, illuminate racism and need to name it, frame it, and explain it. I think that's really what we're doing now, just trying to get definitions and common language and being inclusive about what we're talking about. What do we want to stand for, right? And then the second one, engage affected populations and stakeholders, engagement versus empowerment. And really what they're talking about here is a lot of times we put upon people rather than engaging them. Are we doing the work that the people want us to do, right? Or are we doing what we think is going to impact folks? In education, that happens a lot, where we develop programs for people, but we really don't ask the people who are being impacted by those programs if that really will benefit them. And so it's really engaging those people to find out, okay, so what do you need, and how can we help? And the third is gather and analyze disaggregated data. And that kind of speaks for itself. The more data you have in terms of how these things are being affected, the better you're going to be able to plan for action steps. The fourth, conduct system analysis of root causes of inequity. And so when I think about that, I think about NOAA, I think that's the work that has to be done, is conduct system analysis and root causes of inequity. Where does inequity exist? Where does lack of understanding exist? Where does not commonalities exist? And how do we address those things? The fifth is identify strategies and target resources to address root causes of inequities, understand systems and outcomes. Look beyond individual parts to see how different parts are interacting in the system. And so it's really looking at your organization and really tearing it apart almost, and looking at every part of it, and looking at it through an equity lens, an anti-racist lens. Conduct race equity impact assessment for all policies and decision-making. Race equity assessments should be conducted whenever new policies, procedures are developed. I think that's a really important one for NOAA as well, that when we do come up with policies, or we decide on another, we're trying to evaluate whether we're going to have another task force, a different area. You know, what does that look like? You know, and what policies need to be in place? What procedures need to be in place that will reflect an anti-racist organization? I think you have to do that anytime there's a new policy, that you take that policy and look at it and make sure that it is in line with the principles that you have decided on as an organization around anti-racism. And then continuously evaluate effectiveness and adapt strategies so that, you know, once you decide on something, does it stay that way forever? It may not. You know, we may need to change, we may need to adjust, we may need to rethink. And I think as an organization, you have to be open to that. You know, and so part of that is maybe even reviewing all of the policies that are out that NOAA has right now to make sure, you know, that they are in line with where you're trying to move in terms of being an anti-organization. Thoughts about these 7 steps? Anybody?
One thing, it appeared that you would need an expert. That's what first thing, these are some serious steps. Who would conduct this? Who would do this? I think it's good, but we have to hire someone to actually do this? Because this seems like some serious work. Who would do this? Would someone within our organization could do this, or we would have to get a? It just seems like it's a lot of work to do, and I don't know if we have the personnel.
Well, you know, these are 7 steps that are suggested. Maybe we don't need to do all of them, right? When I was putting these out, putting these down, I really was drawn to number 6 and number 7, because I think we do have to look at everything that we're doing through the lens of whatever we're saying we are in terms of an anti-racist organization. And that can be done by community organizers, that can be done by task force members or the co-chairs, in terms of whenever there is a policy or a decision made in terms of action and direction, that they look at that through the lens of an anti-racist, our anti-racist policy. So that's one that I think could and should be done. And then continually evaluate effectiveness and adapt strategies. I think that's something that has to happen in task force as we move along. You're continually evaluating the effectiveness of your strategy, of what you're doing, and then adapting those strategies. For instance, I'll use the Education Task Force's subcommittee advanced academics. I mean, MNPS pulled out of the partnership of meeting monthly. The task force had to go back to evaluate the effectiveness of what they were doing and adapt a different strategy. So I think those 2 at least can be done in terms of, you know, making sure that we're in line with the beliefs and policies that we are adopting. Yeah.
What I was asking, would it be more effective for us to do this or to have someone come in to do this?
Well, most definitely, if you want to have a position, most definitely it would be work for a person to do, for sure. But, you know, I don't know
I wonder if there's just kind of where there is overlap, or, you know, what's the right word, synthesis or whatever, between what, like, Angela, the consultant, Gamaliel, kind of brings, and like these particular steps. You know, I mean, I know she's pretty invested in what we're doing, and it would just be interesting to see kind of what she comes up with, and then this group or another group can, you know, you all probably would decide like what to implement, you know, kind of get the input from Angela and some different perspectives, maybe outside people, and integrate some of this, or take it and run with it.
It could be interesting to hear what some of the other groups like us have done in this area? You know, what seems successful and what can we learn?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, all of this is really to make us think in terms of where we're going with this. I will not back away from the belief that this is hard work and that we can't assume that people are on board, that they're where we're at, that everybody's at the same place. It's just not that way in any organization. I don't care if you're organization that works in anti-racist kind of area. That whole piece of individual responsibility in terms of looking at these definitions and embracing them and saying, yes, that's who we are. That's hard work because I think some people will struggle with some of them, right? And as we add more, I think that's things that people will have to come to terms with. I just wanted to present some things to make us think about what this work entails. And so that really was the intent of it. What we take from it and what we use and how we move forward most definitely is up to the group. It's really just trying to provide us with kind of a roadmap of thinking about where we need to go from here. Okay, Brian, the next one is the evaluation. And so, Brian, if you want to head this, I just put some things down. If we could put in the chat or say, come on microphone and say feeling word for this activity. We're pretty much on task. I can't see.
Like challenged and encouraged.
Oh yeah, those are good.
I'm going to say beginning, just like that feeling of taking some first steps.
Anybody else?
Well, I'll say I feel excited, but it also feels a bit, not overwhelming, but big.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. And any tensions?
Well,
I would
I
say
feel some tension. Please
ahead.
go ahead.
You, Reverend Lester.
Okay, well, I was about to say I feel some tension around the whole idea of anti-racism, because I think that sometimes we can get so caught up in nomenclature and language and defining something and whatever that we miss the point of what we're trying to achieve. And so I'm just fearful that that's a possibility.
Liza, you were gonna say something?
I just saying the same thing over and over. It just sounds like a lot. I would like to see us do it, and I hope that we do. But it will take focus and effort, and there's tension in knowing how much focus.
One thing to say that we want to be an anti-racist organization, it's another thing to do it.
Right. Exactly.
And this just kind of points out that it is work, and I don't want it to seem like it takes us away from the real work that we're doing. It just really helps, I think, helps us to move that work forward in a consistent and common way.
It'd be all right. I'm interested in what Reverend Lester was saying. I'd like to understand a little more sort of what he was thinking.
Well, I'm still of the belief that simplicity, when at all possible, is good. For example, when Reverend Thompson mentioned the 3 ways we talked about housing, affordable housing, low-income housing, workforce housing, it's important that we have clarity about what we're talking about. But at the same time, the idea of racism not being or not having the power to perpetuate one's prejudices and to institutionalize one's prejudices is a moving away of what racism really is, because ultimately it's about power and the power to institutionalize and perpetuate prejudices for lack of a better word, selfish ends.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
All right, and I can ask, how did the presenters do?
Great.
The presenters think the presenters did.
We couldn't hear you good, Brian. Your microphone.
Oh, I said I wonder how the presenters think the presenters did.
Uh, I mean, I think it's I came away feeling my word would have been daunting. It's a daunting task. And what I would say about that is that just like in this group, we have many different perspectives, right? When you start talking about anti-racism, putting it into an organization and understanding what that really means and what the steps are, it's overwhelming. And then it's like, do we really need to do all this, right? And you know, that's to be determined. I mean, you know, that's to be determined. But yeah, so my word would have been daunting, you know, and you know, and it was good for me, really and truly, to hear, you know, people's perspectives and thoughts. That's going to be important. And just think about, this is a group of 7. When we take it to another group of 25, or you know, and the perspectives that will come to light in terms of this work and what people think that we should be about, you know, as an organization. So, you know, in that regard, I mean, I did okay. I just think you do what you can do.
I think you did a
Well, and it is
fantastic-
daunting, and this is the group that will make the decision on actually how the organization would move forward at the point that we're actually ready to tackle it and make a decision on some next steps. And I just want to thank you, Lorraine, for even getting us started to begin thinking through this process of how we're going to move to next steps.
All right, and last but not least, what value did we see in this in terms of the organization? Was this valuable, you know, in terms of just getting us started?
I think it was. I think it's so easy to get tied up in all the specific issues. We're dealing with a lot of very important issues, whether it's education or housing or transformational justice or whatever we're dealing with. And it's so easy to get all that right in front of your face and not take the time to push back a little bit and say, wait a minute, you know, where are we going, and what kind of narrative are we supporting in the way we do this? Sometimes it's possible to work on good things, but you work on them in such a way that you're supporting a negative thing. You're supporting a racist setup. So I think it was really good just to have a way to push back and think.
Yeah, it does make you think, doesn't it? I mean, when you put out all these terms and thoughts, it does make you reflect on where you're at and where you think we should go, right? So yeah. So that's all. In terms of the agenda, I think if now Reverend Thompson will close us out. That's where we're at. Yep.
Reverend Thompson, you're
Okay, thank you. I sent in the chat some of the racism terminology and definitions. Now you can get those. Those were just 3 several ones I looked at. I thought those were the most exhaustive list. And you can just look at that and you can see it from various areas. And almost each one will include what Lorraine presented to us today, plus many more. And you can see from the various task forces that you work on and so forth, and you can see how those work. Again, I want to thank especially the Education Task Force for initiating this. This is the first step. And what we said, the clergy who's on here will know, we just keep our hand to the plow. And that's what we're gonna have to do with this issue with respect to racism. We just got to be challenged with it. And it won't be comfortable to everyone, but it's needed. And I hope we will be up to the task of it. Again, I want to thank those who come on. And as soon as Gamelia and our consultant, Angela James, let us know, I will especially first, Brian, you can give that information to the Education Task Force and to this particular group. And we can see, and we can get some, and maybe some of the persons here can, maybe when Angela wants to meet with us, make certain some of this group that's on will meet with Angela. She will not be one-to-one. She wants to bring in someone, two special persons who not affiliated with NOAA, so that they can give it, and they want to make a presentation for us. And she will let you know also the process in which how they will do this and the length of time. So as soon as we get the information, we'll share it with you. So again, we want to thank you. I'm very appreciative for those who have come on and the presenters today. Let us pray. God of all creation, God who created all humanity, the God who shows no partiality, we ask you now as we depart to help us to accept each other, help us to change individually, help us to change our organization, help us to change our city, and also we pray that our nation will change. Now we ask that you, as we depart, that we can bring into action what we have discussed today. Let it not just sit on the paper, but it become action. Please keep us over the next few days as we continue to work for justice, and may we never grow tired or weary. Continue to empower us. And this we pray in your name. Amen.
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 Thank you all.
Thanks, Lorraine.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks, Lorraine, and thanks, Linda, and everybody.
Night.
Yes, thanks, presenters. A professional job.
Oh, thank you.